If someone had told me a year ago that the most significant event of my life would happen in a glorified shed at the top of a forgotten mountain, I would have laughed. My life was built on predictable variables. Soil composition, annual rainfall, the slow, methodical migration of alpine flora. I came to the Blackwood Mountain Research Station to study lichen, the most patient and unassuming of all life forms. It suited me. My existence was a quiet one, a carefully curated collection of routines. Wake, coffee, hike, observe, record, sleep. A loop of comfortable solitude. I was a man made of quiet observations and unspoken thoughts, content in my bubble of academic purpose. And then there was Cole. Cole was not a predictable variable. He was the station manager, the handyman, the man who wrestled with generators and fixed leaking roofs and drove the supply truck up the treacherous mountain pass as if it were a trip to the corner store. He was a force of nature, as wild and unpredictable as the mountain itself. I saw him from a distance, mostly, a solid shape against the vast green and gray of the landscape. He moved with an economy of motion I envied, every action precise and confident. He was built of corded muscle and quiet competence. While I cataloged the subtle changes in moss, he was felling a tree that threatened a power line. While I measured micrograms of sediment, he was hauling propane tanks. He was the physical reality of the mountain. I was just a ghost haunting its edges, taking notes. Our interactions were minimal. A clipped nod in the morning, a grunt of acknowledgement as I passed the workshop. He had a way of looking at me, or rather, through me, that made me feel like a particularly uninteresting species of fungus. He was all sharp angles and rough edges, his jaw perpetually set in a line of grim focus. I decided he was arrogant, disdainful of my soft, academic hands and my preference for books over engine parts. This distance was a chasm I had no intention of crossing. It was safe. He was an immovable feature of the landscape, like a granite boulder. Interesting to look at from afar, but fundamentally unapproachable. I built a narrative around him in my head. The strong, silent type. The rugged mountain man who had no time for a city-bred scientist who probably couldn't even change a tire. It was easier to think of him as an archetype than as a man. It kept the longing at bay. A longing that was a quiet, persistent ache in my chest, a traitorous warmth that spread whenever I saw him shirtless in the summer sun, back slick with sweat as he split firewood. My heart would perform a frantic, stupid flutter, a trapped bird against the cage of my ribs. I would quickly look away, my cheeks burning, and retreat to the safety of my charts and my microscope. My solitude was a fortress. Coal was the siege engine I could see on the horizon, a threat I managed by pretending it wasn't there. My routine was my armor, and for months it held, until the sky decided to fall. It started as a whisper, a change in the wind's tone, a deeper shade of gray in the clouds that huddled over the peaks. The mountain had its moods, but this felt different. This felt personal. The barometric pressure dropped like a stone, and the forecast, when the satellite internet was still working, turned from a strong storm to a weather event of historic proportions. The disruption was absolute. My routine shattered. The path to my observation sites was no longer safe. The quiet hum of the station's generators was replaced by a rising howl of wind that clawed at the walls of my small cabin. An emergency beacon flashed on the station's network. A mandatory meeting in the main lodge. My heart hammered against my ribs, not because of the storm, but because this meant proximity. Forced interaction. Cole stood in the center of the common room, a map spread on the large oak table. The few other seasonal researchers and I gathered around, a small cluster of nervous energy. He was the calm center of the storm before the storm. His presence filled the room, solid and reassuring. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice cut through our anxious chatter with the clean edge of an axe. "The pass is closed," he said, his eyes sweeping over us. They lingered on me for a fraction of a second, and my stomach flipped. "No one is going down. We're going to ride it out here." He pointed to the map. "The outbuildings, including the residential cabins, aren't rated for the wind speeds they're predicting. We'll consolidate here, in the lodge." It has a stone foundation and a reinforced roof. Bring a sleeping bag, any personal necessities. We'll have power from the main generator for as long as the fuel lasts. After that, it's batteries and the fireplace. His words were practical, devoid of emotion, but they landed on me like a sentence. We were being forced together. My private space, my fortress of solitude, was being taken from me. I would have to eat, sleep, and exist in the same room as him. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me, colder and sharper than the wind outside. I would have to share a space with a walking, breathing embodiment of all my unspoken desires. The lodge, usually a place of brief, functional encounters, transformed into a strange, communal lifeboat. We dragged in mattresses and sleeping bags, creating small nests for ourselves in the corners of the large common room. The air grew thick with the smell of wet wool and nervous sweat. I found a spot as far away from the center of the room as possible, behind a large leather armchair, trying to make myself small. Invisible. Cole was everywhere at once. He checked the window seals, secured the storm shutters, distributed emergency lanterns. He moved with that same relentless purpose, but now, trapped in the same room, I couldn't just watch him from a distance. He was a tangible, overwhelming presence. I tried to read, but the words swam on the page. My focus was a frayed rope, constantly snapping back to him. The way his dark hair was damp from the rain. The stretch of his flannel shirt across his broad shoulders as he hefted another log onto the fire. The low murmur of his voice as he reassured a young intern who was on the verge of tears. This was a side of him I hadn't seen. Not arrogance, responsibility, a deep, grounding sense of it. As the afternoon bled into a bruised, purple evening, the storm hit. It wasn't a gradual increase. It was a physical blow, a solid wall of wind and snow that slammed into the lodge. The building groaned. The lights flickered, a frantic dying pulse. I could feel the vibration through the floorboards, a deep, resonant tremor that seemed to travel up my spine and settle in my teeth. The world outside was erased. There was only the howling darkness and the small, flickering bubble of our shelter. And Cole, always Cole. I started to notice the small things, the details you miss from a distance. A long, thin scar that cut through his left eyebrow, pale against his tan skin. The way he rubbed the back of his neck when he thought no one was looking, a gesture of profound weariness. His hands. I'd seen them before, of course, but not like this. Not in the warm, dancing light of the fire. They were tools, mapped with calluses and small, faded scars, the knuckles slightly swollen. They were hands that knew how to fix things, how to build, how to hold. He wasn't a granite boulder. He was a man. A tired, stressed man holding the safety of 5 other people in his capable, scarred hands. My carefully constructed narrative of the arrogant mountain man was beginning to crumble. In its place was something far more complex, something far more dangerous to my carefully guarded heart. He wasn't just an object of my distant admiration anymore. He was a person, real and flawed, and overwhelmingly present, just a few feet away. Later, the wind found a weakness. A high, rattling sound started from one of the dormer windows, a frantic drumming that set my nerves on edge. Cole's head snapped up, his focus immediate. He grabbed a toolkit and a heavy-duty flashlight. "I need someone to hold this for me," he said to the room at large. No one moved. The others were huddled in their sleeping bags, faces pale in the lantern light. My body acted before my brain could stop it. I was on my feet. The words came out thin, reedy. Cole looked at me, and for the first time, his gaze didn't slide past me. He actually saw me. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but he just nodded. "Okay, come on." I followed him to the small stepladder he placed beneath the rattling window. The noise was louder up close, a frantic, metallic chattering. He climbed up, a screwdriver clenched between his teeth. "Just hold it steady. Point it right at the latch." I did as he said, my hands trembling slightly as I held the heavy flashlight. The beam cut a clean circle in the dimness, illuminating the vibrating window frame, the flakes of old paint, the side of his face. I was standing so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could smell the faint, clean scent of sawdust and rain that clung to his clothes. My world shrank to the circle of light, to the sound of his breathing, steady and even above the storm's chaos, to the sight of his focused expression, his brow furrowed in concentration. He worked the screwdriver, his movements efficient. The ladder, perched precariously on the old wooden floor, gave a sudden, sickening lurch. It was just a small shift, a groan of old wood, but it was enough. Cole's body tensed. His left hand shot out, instinctively seeking purchase to steady himself. It landed on my shoulder. His grip was firm, strong. His fingers wrapped around the curve of my shoulder blade, his palm flat against my back. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was reflexive, hard, a desperate anchor in a moment of lost balance. And it set me on fire. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through me. It was lightning, arcing from his hand, down my spine to the tips of my toes. My breath hitched. The air was suddenly thick, heavy, impossible to draw into my lungs. Every nerve ending in my body screamed to life, hyper-aware of the 5 points of pressure where his hand held me. The world outside, the rattling window, the other people in the room, it all vanished. There was only the weight, the heat, the shocking reality of his touch. It lasted for maybe 3 seconds. He found his footing. His hand dropped away. The absence of his touch was as shocking as its presence, leaving a cold, tingling ghost on my skin. "Sorry," he muttered, not looking at me, his attention already back on the window. "Floorboards are uneven." I couldn't answer. I just stood there, holding the light, my heart a frantic, wild thing trying to beat its way out of my chest. My entire body was a live wire. He had touched me. It was an accident, a purely functional, meaningless event. But for me, it was a cataclysm, a tectonic shift in the landscape of my lonely existence. He finished with the window, the rattling silenced. He climbed down the ladder. "Thanks," he said, taking the flashlight from my nerveless fingers. His own brushed against mine. Another jolt, smaller this time, but just as potent. He walked away, back to the fire, leaving me standing in the shadows, trembling. The power dynamic had been clear. He was the capable one. I was the observer. He was the protector. I was the protected. But in that moment, holding the light, providing a point of stability, however accidental, I had been useful. I had been a part of the solution. It was a tiny shift, but it felt monumental. A few hours later, the inevitable happened. The lights flickered one last time, a desperate, final spasm, and then died. The roar of the generator outside coughed, sputtered, and fell silent. A collective groan went through the room. The darkness that flooded in was absolute, broken only by the dim glow of the fire and the 2 emergency lanterns Cole had set out. The storm sounded louder now, more menacing without the hum of civilization to keep it at bay. Cole sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated frustration. He ran a hand through his hair. Fuel line must have gelled up. Or the filters clogged. He started pulling on his heavy coat. "You're not going out in that," the intern, a girl named Sarah, said, her voice trembling. "No choice," Cole said, his voice grim. "The battery packs won't last the night. We need the heat." And then I spoke. The words left my mouth before I could think them through, pushed out by some new, unfamiliar impulse. "I can help." Cole paused, one arm in his sleeve, and turned to look at me. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and something close to pity. "Elias, no offense, but what do you know about diesel generators?" My cheeks burned. The old dynamic, snapping back into place. The bookish scientist trying to play with the big machines. But the memory of his hand on my shoulder, the feeling of being useful, it was a small, warm coal inside me. "My grandfather had a farm," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "He had an old tractor with a diesel engine that was older than he was. I spent a whole summer helping him keep it running. It was always the fuel filter." I held his gaze. I didn't let myself look away. For once, he stared at me for a long moment. The firelight carved deep shadows on his face, making him unreadable. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the practical need for help warring with his ingrained self-reliance, and probably his low expectations of me. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fina. But you do exactly what I say. Get your coat. The world outside the lodge was a maelstrom. The wind was a physical force that stole your breath and tried to tear you from your feet. Snow, driven to fine, hard pellets, stung any exposed skin. The short walk to the generator shed was a battle. Cole went first, a human snowplow, his broad back a shield against the worst of the gale. I followed in his wake, head down, clutching the tools he had thrust in my hands. Inside the small shed, the noise of a storm was muffled to a dull, constant roar. It was freezing, the air thick with the metallic smell of cold diesel. Cole switched on a powerful, battery-operated work light, flooding the small space with harsh, clinical brightness. The generator was a huge, greasy beast, silent and inert. "Okay, genius," Cole said, his tone laced with a weary sarcasm that felt more like a defense mechanism than a genuine insult. "Where do we start?" For the next hour, we worked, and for the first time, we were not station manager and scientist. We were just two men, shoulder to shoulder, fighting a common enemy. I pointed to the fuel line, tracing it back to the filter housing, my finger brushing against his as I showed him the shut-off valve. He didn't pull away. My knowledge was theoretical, remembered from a long-ago summer, but combined with his practical, hands-on skill, we made progress. I knew the why, he knew the how. He listened as I explained how the cold could cause paraffin wax in the diesel to crystallize and clog the filter. He nodded, his expression serious, all traces of his earlier skepticism gone. He was the one who had to unscrew the frozen bolts on the filter housing, his knuckles white with effort, cursing under his breath as the cold metal refused to yield. I was the one who held the light steady, who anticipated which tool he would need next, placing it in his outstretched hand without him having to ask. We fell into a rhythm, a silent, efficient dance of shared purpose. The small shed became our entire world, an island of focused effort in an ocean of chaos. Finally, with a groan of protesting metal, the housing came loose. Cole pulled out the filter. It was thick with a whitish, waxy sludge. "Well, I'll be damned," he breathed, a small cloud of vapor escaping his lips. He looked at me, and in the harsh glare of the work light, I saw it again. Surprise. And something else. Respect. He cleaned the filter, his movements quick and sure. As he worked to put it all back together, the cold was beginning to seep deep into my bones. I was shivering, my fingers stiff and clumsy. He noticed. "Here." He shrugged off his own heavy outer coat. It was a massive, insulated canvas thing. "Put this on. No, you need it," I protested, my teeth chattering. "I'm working, generating heat." "You're not." He didn't wait for an argument, just draped the heavy coat over my shoulders. It was like being wrapped in a bear hug. It smelled of him, that scent of sawdust and engine oil and cold, clean air. It was overwhelmingly, dizzyingly intimate. I pulled it tighter around me, my shivers slowly subsiding, replaced by a different kind of tremor deep inside me. With the filter clean and the lines cleared, it was time to try it. Cole hit the ignition. The engine turned, coughed, sputtered. Once, twice. My heart was in my throat. And then, with a deafening roar, it caught. It roared to life, shaking the very foundations of the small shed. Cole let out a whoop of triumph, a raw, unguarded sound of pure relief. He turned to me, a wide, genuine grin splitting his face. It transformed him. It wiped away the weariness and the grim focus, revealing someone younger, someone lighter. In that moment of shared victory, all the barriers between us evaporated. The noise of a generator was a physical wall of sound, making speech impossible. He just looked at me, his eyes bright in the stark light. He reached out and clapped me on the shoulder, the same shoulder he had grabbed before. But this time, it wasn't an accident. It was a gesture of camaraderie, of gratitude. He didn't let go. His hand stayed there, a warm, heavy weight. We stood there for a long moment, grinning at each other like idiots over the roar of the engine, the world outside forgotten. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been completely redrawn. We made our way back to the lodge, the lights now blazing, a beacon of warmth and safety against the raging storm. The others cheered as we came through the door, stamping snow from our boots. Sarah hugged me, a quick, grateful embrace that I barely registered. My entire being was still humming from the pressure of Cole's hand on my shoulder, from the warmth of his coat, from the blinding brilliance of his smile. The crisis was over for now. The heat was on, the lights were bright. People settled back into their sleeping bags, the adrenaline fading into a weary relief. But for me, the world had been irrevocably altered. The quiet, predictable life I had built for myself lay in ruins, and I found I didn't care. Later, after everyone else had fallen asleep, I sat by the fire, unable to quiet my racing mind. The common room was filled with the soft sounds of sleeping bodies. The storm still raged outside, a constant deep-throated growl, but inside it was peaceful. I thought I was alone until a floorboard creaked behind me. It was Cole. He was holding 2 mugs, steam curling from their rims. He walked over and handed one to me. It was hot, sweet tea. Couldn't sleep either, he said, his voice a low rumble that was almost lost beneath the wind's howl. He didn't sit in one of the other chairs. He sat on the hearth, just a few feet from me, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body as a distinct presence. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the flames dance and weave. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, full. The space between us felt charged, humming with all the things we weren't saying. The shared victory in the generator shed. The accidental touch. The coat. He broke the silence first. "You're not what I thought, you know," he said, his eyes fixed on the fire. My heart stuttered. "What did you think I was?" He shrugged, a small, self-deprecating movement. "I don't know." Another academic passing through. Head in the clouds. Someone who looks at this mountain and just sees data points. He finally turned his head, his gaze meeting mine. His eyes were dark, serious. I was wrong. The directness of his stare was unnerving, liberating. "I was wrong about you, too," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "I thought you were, I don't know, arrogant. I thought you didn't like me." A shadow of something, pain, regret, crossed his face. "It's not. It wasn't about you. It's quiet up here. People come and go. It's easier to just keep a distance." He looked away again, back at the flames. "Gets lonely, though." There it was. A crack in the facade. A glimpse of the vulnerability he kept so well hidden behind his wall of competence. The strong, silent man was lonely. The admission hung in the air between us, as raw and real as the storm outside. It was a gift, an offering, and I felt a sudden, desperate need to offer something in return. To be just as honest. "I know," I said, and the words felt like they were being pulled from the deepest part of me. "I've spent my whole life convincing myself I prefer to be alone. That it's a choice." I took a shaky breath. "But it's not. It's a habit. A fortress I built because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" he asked, his voice gentle. I couldn't say it. "Afraid of this. Afraid of wanting someone so much it hurts. Afraid of you." Instead, I said, "Of the storm." He knew I wasn't talking about the weather. I could see it in his eyes. He understood. In that moment, we saw each other. Truly saw each other. Not as archetypes, but as 2 lonely men, huddled by a fire, hiding from a world that felt too loud and too dangerous. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. The fire crackled, a counterpoint to the wild symphony of the wind. He shifted on the hearth, turning his body more fully toward me. The space between us shrank. I could count the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. I could see the pulse beating in his throat. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "This is happening. This is real." He lifted a hand, slowly, hesitantly, as if giving me time to pull away. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, caught in the gravity of his presence. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed against my cheek. A feather-light touch. A question. I leaned into his hand, a small, involuntary movement. A surrender. That was all the answer he needed. His expression softened. He moved closer, the rough fabric of his jeans brushing against mine. He tilted his head, his eyes searching my face, and then he leaned in. The first kiss wasn't frantic or passionate. It was a discovery. It was slow, hesitant, breathtakingly gentle. His lips were chapped from the cold, but soft. The kiss was tentative at first, a soft pressure, a question asked and answered in the same breath. I felt a shudder go through me, a release of tension I hadn't even known I was holding. Years of it, a lifetime of it. I brought my own hand up, my fingers tangling in the thick, soft hair at the nape of his neck. He made a low sound in his throat, a sound of need and relief, and deepened the kiss. It was still slow, still gentle, but now it was filled with a certainty that stole the breath from my lungs. It was a kiss that spoke of lonely nights and unspoken longing. It was a kiss that said, I see you. You're not alone. Not anymore. When we finally broke apart, we just stayed there, foreheads resting together, our breath mingling in the warm, fire-lit air. The storm still howled outside, a wild and angry beast. But in here, in this small pocket of impossible intimacy, there was only a profound and perfect silence. The world had fallen away, and we had found shelter in each other. I woke to sunlight. It was a pale, watery light, but it was sunlight nonetheless, streaming through the lodge windows and painting long, dusty stripes across the wooden floor. The storm had broken. The silence was the first thing I noticed. A deep, profound quiet that felt alien after the constant roar of the wind. My second thought was Cole. I was in my sleeping bag, behind the armchair where I'd made my nest. My body was stiff but warm. For a panicked, disoriented moment, I couldn't remember how I got there. The fire, the kiss, his hand in my hair. We had stayed by the fire for hours, talking in low murmurs, our hands finding each other in the darkness. He had walked me back to my corner, a chaste, lingering kiss, my only good night. It had felt like a promise, a beginning. Now, in the cold light of morning, my stomach was a knot of writhing snakes. Anxiety, sharp and familiar, was a cold trickle of ice water in my veins. It was a mistake, a trick of the light. Storm fever. I sat up, my heart hammering. The common room was a mess of sleeping bags and discarded blankets, but most people were already awake, their voices a low, tired murmur. I scanned the room, my eyes searching, desperate, and then I saw him. He was by the main door, already dressed in his heavy work gear, talking to one of the other researchers. His back was to me. His posture was all business. The easy intimacy of the night before, the vulnerability I'd seen in his eyes, was gone. He had rebuilt his fortress. He was the station manager again. He turned, and for a split second, his eyes met mine across the room. I felt a jolt, a flicker of hope. But he looked away almost immediately, his expression unreadable, and went back to his conversation. The hope died. The cold dread flooded in to take its place. He was regretting it. Of course he was. I was a fool. In the heat of the moment, trapped by the storm, two lonely people had sought a moment of comfort. That's all it was. The sun was out now. The real world had returned. And in the real world, he and I, we made no sense. My former solitude, the one I had cultivated and cherished, returned. But it was different now. It was no longer a comfortable fortress. It was a punishment, a cold, empty room that was tainted by the ghost of his presence. Every corner of my mind was filled with the memory of his touch, his taste, the sound of his voice saying my name. The silence in my head was no longer peaceful. It was just an absence, a gaping hole where he had been. The day was a special kind of hell. The work of digging out began. The storm had dumped nearly 5 feet of snow, burying everything in a pristine, indifferent blanket of white. We all worked, shoveling paths, clearing roofs. I worked with a frantic, desperate energy, trying to exhaust my body so my mind would shut down. Cole was a whirlwind of activity, directing everyone, his voice once again clipped and professional. He never spoke to me directly unless it was a work-related order. Elias, clear the path to the solar panels. Elias, can you give me a hand with this drift? The words were functional. Empty. He avoided my eyes. Every time we were near each other, the space between us crackled with a terrible, unspoken tension. It was a physical weight. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him by the front of his jacket and demand to know what had changed. But I couldn't. The fear of rejection was a gag in my mouth. What if I was right? What if he confirmed that it was all a huge mistake? The humiliation would be more than I could bear. So I said nothing. I shoveled snow and said nothing. And the silence grew, becoming a monstrous, living thing that was suffocating me. By late afternoon, we had cleared enough that we could return to our own cabins. The thought of my small, private space, which I had longed for just 2 days ago, now filled me with a sense of utter desolation. I didn't want to be alone. Not anymore. I packed my few belongings from the lodge, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked back to my cabin through the newly carved snow canyons. The world was blindingly white and silent. Inside, the air was stale and colder than it was outside. It felt wrong. Empty. A museum of a life I no longer wanted. I sat on the edge of my bed, the silence of the small room pressing in on me. The anxiety had subsided, replaced by a hollow, aching sadness. I had been given a glimpse of something extraordinary, a connection I never thought possible, and then it had been snatched away. I made a decision. I would leave. My research was mostly complete anyway. I could finish my analysis back at the university. I would pack my things, and as soon as the past was clear, I would go. It was the only way to protect what was left of my heart. To run away. It was what I was good at. I pulled my suitcase out from under the bed and started taking clothes from the small dresser, folding them with numb, detached precision. Each folded shirt was a brick in the wall I was rebuilding around myself. A knock on the door made me jump so violently I dropped the sweater on the floor. My heart leaped into my throat. It couldn't be. I stood frozen for a moment, unable to move, unable to breathe. The knock came again, louder this time, insistent. Taking a shaky breath, I walked to the door. I opened it. It was Cole. He stood on my small porch, backlit by the setting sun that was turning the snow a pale, bruised pink. He looked exhausted. His face was grim, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that had nothing to do with shoveling snow. He wasn't wearing his confident, capable mask anymore. He just looked lost. He said nothing. His eyes flicked from my face to the open suitcase on my bed, and a flicker of something. Panic? Pain crossed his features. "You're packing," he stated. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I found my voice. "My work is done here." It sounded weak, false, even to my own ears. He took a step forward, crossing the threshold into my cabin, into my space. He closed the door behind him, plunging the small room into a dim, intimate twilight. "Is that what this is?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Your work is done?" The dam of my carefully constructed composure broke. "What do you want me to say, Cole? That was a fun little storm fling. Thanks for the memories. We both know what last night was. A mistake. An anomaly. You've made that perfectly clear all day." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "A mistake? Is that what you think it was? What else am I supposed to think?" I shot back, my voice rising with all the hurt and confusion of a day. "You wouldn't even look at me. You treated me like a stranger. Like I was just another employee to order around." He took another step closer, his hands clenched in a fist at his sides. "Because I'm a coward, Elias." The confession was so quiet I almost missed it. It stopped my angry tirade cold. "I woke up this morning," he continued, his eyes locked on mine, raw and vulnerable, and the sun was out. The storm was over. And I looked at you, sleeping, and I panicked. Because it was real. What happened between us, it wasn't the storm. It was real. And that scared the hell out of me. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound frustration. "I'm not good at this. At feelings. At letting people in. My whole life, it's just been me. Me and the work. It's simple. It's safe. And you're not simple. You are not safe." He looked at me, and his expression was one of desperate, pleading honesty. "I saw you packing, and my stomach just dropped. The thought of you leaving, I can't explain it. I spent the whole day pushing you away because I was terrified. And it was the stupidest, most miserable day of my life. All the anger, all the hurt, drained out of me, leaving behind a fragile, trembling hope." He was scared, just like me. He had retreated to his fortress, just like me. I was scared too. I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "When you wouldn't look at me, I thought you regretted it. I thought I had imagined everything. I haven't been able to think about anything else," he said, his voice a low growl. "Every time I closed my eyes today, I could feel you. I could taste you, He closed the remaining distance between us in 2 long strides. He didn't touch me, not yet. He just stood before me, his presence filling my small cabin, filling my entire world. "This is new territory for me," he said, "and it's terrifying. But the idea of going back to how things were before, that's worse. Being alone in my cabin tonight, knowing you're in yours. I can't do it." His honesty was a balm on my wounded pride. It was the truth, unvarnished and frightening. He wasn't the confident, immovable man I had first imagined. He was just as lost in this as I was. And in that shared fear, there was a profound connection. "So don't," I whispered. His eyes searched mine, asking a question he couldn't seem to voice. I gave him the answer. I reached out and took his hand, his calloused, capable hand. I laced my fingers through his. His skin was cold from the outdoors, but a current of warmth passed between us, a circuit completed. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding all day. His shoulders sagged in relief. "I don't want to go back to my cabin," he said, his voice thick. Not alone. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a plea, a promise. It was more than just seeking shelter from a cold. It was a choice to stay in this new, uncharted territory. Together. He didn't take his things from his cabin. Not that night. He didn't need to. He just stayed. He stayed, and the small, empty cabin was suddenly a home. We didn't talk much more. We didn't need to. The most important things had been said. He helped me unpack the clothes I had just folded, his large hands gentle as he placed my sweaters back in a drawer. A simple, domestic act that felt more significant than any grand declaration. Later, we lay in my narrow bed, the cold night pressing against the window panes. He held me, his arm a heavy, reassuring weight around my waist, his body a solid wall of warmth at my back. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. For the first time in my life, I fell asleep without a trace of anxiety, feeling utterly and completely safe. The days that followed were a quiet revelation. The station slowly returned to a state of normalcy, but our normal had been fundamentally rewritten. The chasm that had once existed between us was gone, filled in with shared glances, secret smiles, and the easy comfort of 1,000 small intimacies. It began with coffee. I would wake up in the morning, tangled in sheets that smelled of him, and he would already be in the tiny kitchen, the rich aroma of brewing coffee filling the cabin. He'd hand me a mug, his fingers brushing mine, a silent greeting that said more than words ever could. We'd sit at my small table, his large frame making the furniture seem like it belonged in a dollhouse, and watch the sun rise over the snow-covered peaks. His boots appeared by the door, next to my hiking shoes. His toothbrush was in the cup next to mine. These small invasions of my once sacred solitary space didn't feel like intrusions. They felt like anchors, evidence that this was real, that he was real, that he was here to stay. We learned the rhythms of each other's days. I would go out to my research sites, and he would work on repairing the storm damage. But now, my solitude was different. It was a temporary state, a brief sojourn from a warm and waiting center. I was no longer alone. I was simply apart from him for a few hours. The thought of returning to him, of seeing his face light up when I walked through the door, was a bright, steady flame in my chest. We ate our meals together. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in a small logging town, about his fraught relationship with his father, about his dream of one day building his own cabin by hand on a piece of land he owned. I told him about my passion for the unseen, patient world of plants, about my awkward childhood, about the deep, abiding loneliness I'd carried with me for as long as I could remember. We were mapping each other's inner landscapes, just as I had once mapped the floor of the mountain. Sleeping next to him was the biggest change. To share the most vulnerable hours of the night with another person, to not feel the need to keep a part of myself awake and on guard. It was a gift. Sometimes I would wake in the middle of the night and just watch him sleep, the firelight from the small stove flickering over the strong lines of his face, his expression peaceful and unguarded. The fierce, capable station manager was gone, and in his place was just Cole. My Cole. And a wave of such profound love and tenderness would wash over me that it left me breathless. The storm hadn't just been a weather event. It was a cataclysm that had broken open the world, and more importantly, had broken me open. It had shattered the fortress of solitude I had so carefully constructed, and had shown me that what I thought was safety was actually a prison. My life before Cole hadn't been peaceful. It had been muted. A black and white photograph. He had brought the color. He was the ultimate, unpredictable variable, the plot twist I never saw coming. He didn't fit into any of my carefully constructed equations about my life. He had disrupted everything. He had taken my quiet, ordered existence and turned it upside down. And in the beautiful, chaotic, wonderful mess he had made, I had finally, for the first time, found a place that felt like home. He was the landscape I wanted to spend the rest of my life exploring. He was my shelter from a storm,